Hello, my name is Madison, and I never thought I'd be the type of person to have someone's car towed on their wedding day. But sometimes, life pushes you to a breaking point where being neighborly just isn't enough anymore. Picture this. You come home after a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, your scrubs still damp with sweat, your feet screaming in your shoes, and all you want is to collapse on your couch with a glass of wine. Instead, you find a massive pickup truck blocking your driveway. Again, not just partially blocking it, mind you, but completely barricading your own property like they own the place. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. Now, I'm not someone who looks for trouble. I've lived in my cozy little house in Maple Grove, Minnesota for 8 years, and I've always prided myself on being the kind of neighbor who brings cookies during the holidays and offers to water plants during vacations. But when someone repeatedly disrespects your property and ignores every polite attempt at resolution, well, that's when Madison the pushover transforms into Madison the problem solver. The irony? My inconsiderate neighbor was about to have the most important day of his life, his wedding reception. And thanks to his months of parking entitlement, I was about to give him a wedding gift he'd never forget. You might think I'm heartless for what I did, but stick around for the whole story, because sometimes the only way to teach someone respect is to let them experience the consequences of their actions at the most inconvenient moment possible. And trust me, the fallout from this decision created drama that lasted far longer than anyone could have predicted. So, buckle up, because this tale of parking wars, wedding day chaos, and neighborhood justice is about to take some seriously unexpected turns. Let me set the scene properly. I'm a registered nurse at Hennepin County Medical Center, working rotating shifts that would make a vampire jealous. Some weeks I'm pulling day shifts, others I'm stumbling home at dawn after a night in the ER that felt like a war zone. My house on Elmwood Avenue became my sanctuary, a modest, 2-bedroom craftsman with a small front yard and a driveway just wide enough for my Honda Civic. The trouble started about 6 months ago when Trevor Hutchinson moved in next door. Trevor was one of those guys who seemed to believe the world revolved around his convenience. Mid-20s, worked in construction, and drove this monster of a Ford F-250 that looked like it could tow a small building. The truck itself wasn't the problem. The problem was where he decided to park it. See, Trevor's girlfriend, Amber, also lived with him, and she had her own car. Their driveway could technically fit both vehicles, but Trevor apparently found it more convenient to just swing his truck across the property line and block my driveway instead. The first time it happened, I figured it was an honest mistake. I knocked on his door that Tuesday evening, still in my scrubs, exhaustion weighing down my shoulders. Trevor answered wearing nothing but basketball shorts and an attitude. "Hey there," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm Madison from next door. I think you accidentally parked in my driveway." He glanced over at his truck, then back at me with this look that said he couldn't care less. "Oh yeah, I'll move it later. I actually need to get to work early tomorrow morning, so if you could—" I said I'll move it later. The door closed in my face. Later turned out to be 3 days later, and only after I'd had to call an Uber to get to work because I couldn't get my car out. When I confronted him again, Trevor shrugged and said he'd been busy. Busy doing what, I wondered, but I bit my tongue. The pattern established itself quickly. Trevor would park in my driveway whenever it suited him, which was often. Sometimes it was for a few hours, sometimes overnight. I'd leave polite notes on his windshield. I'd knock on his door. I even tried talking to Amber once when I caught her checking the mail, but she just mumbled something about how parking was tight in the neighborhood. Parking wasn't tight. Everyone else managed to park in their own driveways just fine. The breaking point came on a particularly hellish Thursday in September. I'd just finished a double shift dealing with 3 cardiac arrests and a multi-car accident that kept me on my feet for 16 straight hours. My back was screaming, my head was pounding, and I'd been looking forward to nothing but a hot shower and my bed. Trevor's truck sat in my driveway like a blue steel monument to his selfishness. I sat in my car for a full minute, too tired to even be angry anymore. Then something inside me snapped, not into rage, but into cold, calculated determination. I pulled out my phone and started researching Minnesota parking laws and towing regulations. That's when I discovered something interesting. If someone parks on your private property without permission, you have every legal right to have them towed at their expense. The towing company doesn't need their consent, doesn't need to wait for them to move it. They just need your say-so as the property owner. I also discovered that Trevor and Amber were getting married in exactly 3 weeks. I'll be honest, at first I wasn't planning anything vindictive. The wedding information was just neighborhood gossip I'd overheard while getting my mail. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down loves to chat, and she'd mentioned seeing wedding preparations at the Hutchinson place. Caterers coming and going, a rental company delivering tables and chairs to their backyard, that sort of thing. But as Trevor's parking situation got worse, not better, I found myself paying more attention to their wedding timeline. And let me tell you, Trevor was pulling out all the stops for his big day. The backyard transformation was impressive. White tents, string lights, a dance floor, even a small stage for what I assumed would be a band or DJ. Meanwhile, his truck continued to make my life miserable. The Tuesday after I'd researched towing laws, I came home to find not just Trevor's truck but also Amber's car parked across my driveway. Apparently they were having some kind of pre-wedding gathering and needed the extra space. I knocked on their door again, this time with a bit more steel in my voice. "Trevor, I need you to move both vehicles immediately. I can't get into my own driveway." He appeared in the doorway with a beer in his hand and music pumping from inside the house. "Come on, Madison, it's just for tonight. We've got family in town for wedding stuff." "I don't care if you've got the Pope visiting," I said, my patience finally wearing thin. "This is my property, and I need access to it." "Jesus, relax. It's just a few hours." "No, Trevor. Move them now or I'm calling a tow truck." He laughed, actually laughed, and took a swig of his beer. "You wouldn't dare. Nobody's that much of a Karen." That word hit me like a slap. Karen. The ultimate dismissal. The way men like Trevor reduce any woman who stands up for herself to a tired stereotype. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my voice level. "Move the cars, Trevor." "Or what?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Or you'll find out." He slammed the door, but 20 minutes later, both vehicles were moved. I'd won that battle, but the war was far from over, and Trevor had just made it personal by calling me a Karen. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched their wedding preparations intensify. The backyard became a Pinterest-perfect wonderland. Vendors arrived daily, florists, caterers, a woman who spent an entire afternoon positioning lighting. I have to admit, it looked beautiful. I also started documenting every single time Trevor parked in my driveway. Photos with timestamps, screenshots of my work schedule showing when I needed access to my car, even a log of how long each illegal parking incident lasted. My nursing training had taught me to be thorough with documentation, and I was applying those skills to this situation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a healthcare worker who dedicates her life to helping people, planning to potentially ruin someone's wedding day. But every time doubt crept in, I'd remember Trevor's dismissive attitude, his complete lack of respect for my property, and especially that word, Karen. 3 days before the wedding, Trevor outdid himself. I came home from a particularly brutal shift in the ICU to find his truck not just in my driveway, but parked in such a way that even if I could somehow squeeze my car past it, I wouldn't be able to get out again. He'd essentially trapped me in my own garage. This time, I didn't knock on his door. This time, I pulled out my phone and called Decimo AA Towing. "Hi, I need to schedule a vehicle removal from my private property," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "But not today. I need it for this Saturday around 2 p.m. The dispatcher seemed confused by my specificity, but took down all the details. Saturday was Trevor's wedding day. The reception was scheduled to start at 3 p.m. in their backyard, and I'd noticed that Trevor always parked in my driveway when they had big gatherings. More convenient for him, more space for his guests. I was betting he'd do the same thing on his wedding day. Saturday morning arrived with perfect September weather, crisp air, brilliant blue skies, and the kind of golden sunlight that makes everything look like a movie scene. It would have been a beautiful day for a wedding if I weren't potentially about to turn it into a nightmare. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling between determination and doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I the kind of person who ruins someone's wedding day over a parking dispute? But then I remembered 6 months of disrespect, missed work meetings because I couldn't get my car out, and Trevor's smug face calling me a Karen. By 10 a.m., the Hutchinson backyard was buzzing with activity. I watched from my kitchen window as caterers set up buffet tables, a DJ tested sound equipment, and what looked like Trevor's entire extended family arrived to help with last-minute preparations. It was clearly going to be a big celebration. At 11:30, right on schedule, Trevor emerged from his house in a tuxedo that actually looked pretty sharp on him. He was laughing with his groomsmen, looking genuinely happy and relaxed. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. This was his wedding day, the most important day of his life, and I was potentially about to ruin it. But then he walked directly to his truck, started it up, and without even glancing toward my house, backed it right into my driveway, just like I'd predicted, just like he'd done dozens of times before, treating my property like his personal parking lot. The guilt evaporated instantly, replaced by cold determination. I checked my watch, 11:45 a.m. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 1 p.m. in their backyard, followed by the reception. I'd planned this timing carefully. I wanted Trevor to be fully committed to his celebration, surrounded by family and friends, completely invested in his perfect day. At 12:30, I watched through my window as guests began arriving. Cars lined the street, people in their wedding finest walked up the driveway carrying gifts, and I could hear laughter and music drifting over the fence. Trevor was probably getting married right about now. I pulled out my phone and called TPA Towing. "This is Madison Reeves. I scheduled a vehicle removal for 2 p.m. today?" "Yes, ma'am. We have that on the schedule. Address is 1247 Elmwood Avenue, correct?" "That's right. The vehicle is a blue Ford F-250, license plate." I read off the numbers I'd memorized months ago. "Our driver should be there within the next 30 minutes. You'll need to be present to authorize the tow." "I'll be here." I hung up and sat in my living room, watching the celebration next door reach full swing. Through the gaps in the fence, I could see people dancing, hear toasts being made, see Trevor and Amber posing for photos. They looked genuinely happy, genuinely in love. A small voice in my head whispered that I could still call it off. I could phone the towing company back and cancel. I could let Trevor have his perfect wedding day, and maybe, we could work out the parking situation like civilized neighbors afterward. But then I heard Trevor's voice booming over the music, telling some story that made everyone laugh. And I realized something. He wasn't thinking about me at all. On this day, when he'd once again parked in my driveway, once again treated my property like his own, he probably hadn't given me a single thought. I was invisible to him, just like my property rights were invisible to him. At 2:15 p.m., a large flatbed tow truck rumbled down Elmwood Avenue and stopped in front of my house. The driver, a weathered man in his 50s wearing a baseball cap and work clothes, climbed out and approached my front door. "You the lady who called about the truck in your driveway?" "That's me." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He glanced over at Trevor's F-250, then at the obvious wedding celebration happening next door, and raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this, ma'am? Looks like they've got a big party going on." I looked at the truck, blocking my driveway, then at the celebration, where Trevor was probably having the time of his life, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. "I'm sure." The tow truck driver, his name badge read Dale, walked over to examine Trevor's truck with professional efficiency. He checked the license plate against his paperwork, took a few photos for documentation, and began hooking up the chains. "This is going to make some noise," Dale warned me. "You might want to go inside." But I didn't go inside. I stood on my front porch, arms crossed, watching as the massive truck was slowly winched onto the flatbed. The mechanical whining of the tow truck's motor mixed with the sounds of celebration from next door, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. It took about 10 minutes to get the truck loaded and secured. During that time, a few wedding guests walking to their cars noticed what was happening, but they just assumed it was some kind of breakdown or routine towing. Nobody seemed alarmed yet. Dale climbed back into his cab and rolled down the window. "Where are we taking this, ma'am?" "Wherever you usually take illegally parked vehicles," I said. "That'd be our impound lot on Industrial Boulevard. Owner can pick it up Monday morning for $185, plus $25 per day storage." Monday morning. That meant Trevor would be without his truck for his entire honeymoon weekend. The irony was almost poetic. "Sounds perfect," I said. As Dale drove away with Trevor's truck, I went back inside my house and tried to act normal. I made myself a sandwich, checked my work emails, even did a load of laundry. But every few minutes, I found myself peeking out the window, waiting for the inevitable moment when Trevor would discover his truck was gone. That moment came at 4:30 p.m. I was folding laundry in my bedroom when I heard the first shouts, male voices, angry and confused, coming from next door. I crept to my window and peered through the blinds. Trevor was standing in his driveway in his tuxedo, hands on his hips, staring at the empty space where his truck had been. Two of his groomsmen flanked him, and I could see Amber approaching in her wedding dress, looking confused. "Where the hell is my truck?" Trevor's voice carried clearly across the yard. I watched as the small group grew larger, wedding guests drawn by the commotion. Someone suggested maybe it had been stolen. Someone else wondered if Trevor had forgotten where he'd parked it. One of his groomsmen pulled out his phone, probably calling the police to report a stolen vehicle. Then Mrs. Patterson appeared at the edge of the gathering, sweet, gossipy Mrs. Patterson, who never missed a detail of neighborhood drama. "Oh, that truck?" I heard her say. "I saw a tow truck take it about an hour ago. Big flatbed, professional operation." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the music seemed to stop. "Towed?" Trevor's voice cracked. "Why would it be towed?" And then, like watching a light bulb flicker on, I saw the realization hit him. His head turned slowly toward my house, and even from my bedroom window, I could see the fury building on his face. "Madison!" he bellowed. "Madison, get out here!" I closed the blinds and stepped away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no going back now. The pounding on my front door started 30 seconds later, heavy, angry knocks that shook the frame. I could hear Trevor shouting, his voice raw with rage. "Open this door! Open it right now! What did you do with my truck?" I stood in my living room frozen as the reality of what I'd done crashed over me. This wasn't just about parking anymore. I'd escalated this into something much bigger, much more public. Half the neighborhood was probably watching this unfold, and Trevor's entire wedding party was getting a front row seat to the drama. "I know you're in there," Trevor continued pounding. "You had my truck towed on my wedding day? Are you insane?" Behind his voice, I could hear other sounds. Amber crying, guests murmuring, someone trying to calm Trevor down. I'd successfully ruined his perfect day, but somehow, standing in my own living room listening to the chaos I'd created, I didn't feel victorious. I felt terrified. The pounding on my door continued for another 5 minutes before I heard other voices intervening. Trevor's father, I thought, and maybe his best man, trying to pull him away from my house and back to the wedding reception. But Trevor wasn't giving up easily. "She had my truck towed," he kept shouting. "On my wedding day, who does that?" I finally gathered enough courage to approach my front door and speak through it. "Trevor, you were parked illegally on my private property," I called out, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I asked you multiple times to stop parking in my driveway." "It's my wedding day!" he screamed back. "And it's my property every day," I replied. finding my voice getting stronger. "You don't get a free pass to break the law just because you're having a party." There was a moment of silence, then Trevor's voice again, but quieter, more dangerous. "You have no idea what you've just done." After that, the voices moved away from my door and back toward the Hutchinson property. I crept to my window again and watched the drama unfold in their backyard. Trevor was pacing like a caged animal, still in his tuxedo, while Amber sat at one of the reception tables with her head in her hands. Her beautiful wedding dress seemed to droop with disappointment. Several guests had already left. I could see cars pulling away from the curb, people apparently deciding this wasn't the kind of family drama they wanted to witness. The remaining guests clustered in small groups, talking in hushed tones and stealing glances toward my house. Trevor's father, a burly man who looked like an older version of his son, was on the phone, presumably calling towing companies to find out where the truck had been taken. I could hear fragments of his conversation drifting over the fence. "Blue Ford, F-250, license plate Delta, Charlie 7, wedding reception. Yes, it's an emergency." It took him 3 calls to find the right company. When he finally hung up, I watched him deliver the news to Trevor. Even from my window, I could see Trevor's face go through a whole range of emotions: anger, disbelief, despair, and then back to rage. The towing company was closed until Monday. The truck was locked in an impound lot, and there was no emergency weekend retrieval service. Trevor would have to wait until Monday morning, pay the fees, and deal with the paperwork then. His honeymoon road trip to the North Shore, I'd overheard Amber talking about it with the mailman last week, would have to be postponed or completely changed. Around 6 p.m., the reception officially died. The remaining guests filtered out, offering awkward congratulations and promises to call later. The caterers packed up most of the untouched food. The DJ broke down his equipment while Trevor sat at a table with his head in his hands and Amber stood by the fence, staring at my house with an expression I couldn't quite read. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across both our yards, I started to feel the full weight of what I'd done. Yes, Trevor had been a terrible neighbor. Yes, he'd disrespected my property and dismissed my concerns. But I'd also turned his wedding day, one of the most important days of his life, into a disaster. The rational part of my brain reminded me that he'd brought this on himself. I'd given him multiple warnings, multiple chances to be a decent neighbor. He'd chosen to ignore them all, right up to parking in my driveway on his wedding day. But the human part of my brain kept showing me images of Amber in her beautiful dress, crying at a reception table, of Trevor's family trying to salvage what was supposed to be a celebration, of guests leaving early because the groom was having a meltdown in the driveway. Around 10 p.m., long after the last guest had gone home and the backyard lights had been turned off, I heard a soft knock on my door. Not the angry pounding from earlier, but a gentle, almost hesitant tapping. I looked through the peephole and saw Amber standing on my porch. She'd changed out of her wedding dress and into jeans and a sweater. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her expression wasn't angry. It was exhausted, sad, and something else I couldn't identify. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door. "Madison?" Amber's voice was hoarse from crying. "Can we talk? Please?" I looked past her toward their house, which was now dark except for the porch light. "Where's Trevor?" "Inside, drinking beer and calling you names I won't repeat." She wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. "He doesn't know I'm here." I stepped aside to let her in, surprised by my own decision. We sat in my living room, an awkward silence stretching between us. Up close, I could see that Amber looked exhausted, not just from today, but in a deeper way that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd dealt with Trevor's anger. "I'm not here to yell at you," she said finally. "I mean, I'm upset about the truck, obviously, but I need to understand why you did it today, on our wedding day." I'd been preparing for angry confrontations, legal threats, maybe even police showing up at my door. But this quiet, honest question caught me off guard. Amber, I asked him dozens of times to stop parking in my driveway. I left notes, I knocked on your door, I even tried talking to you that one time by the mailbox. Nothing worked. I know. Her admission surprised me. I told him he should stop, that it wasn't fair to you. We fought about it more than once. Then why didn't he stop? Amber was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Because Trevor doesn't like being told what to do, especially by... She trailed off. By women? She nodded miserably. He's not a bad person, Madison. But he has this thing about authority, about people trying to control him. His dad was like that. Everything was a power struggle. And Trevor learned that if you just ignore people long enough, they usually give up. I thought about all the times I'd approached Trevor, how he'd dismissed me, minimized my concerns, called me a Karen. But I didn't give up. No, you didn't. Amber looked up at me with something that might have been respect. And today, when he parked in your driveway again, even though I specifically told him not to because it was our wedding day and we didn't need any drama, he did it anyway. He said you were bluffing, that you'd never actually call a tow truck because nobody's that petty. She laughed bitterly. I think those were his exact words. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of a Saturday evening, distant traffic, a dog barking, a siren somewhere across town. Normal sounds for everyone except the newlyweds next door. Can I ask you something? Amber said. Did you know it was our wedding day when you called the tow truck? I considered lying, but something about her honesty demanded the same in return. Yes. She nodded as if she'd expected that answer. And you did it anyway. I did it because it was your wedding day, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. He parked in my driveway on the most important day of his life, knowing I'd asked him dozens of times not to. That told me everything I needed to know about how much respect he has for me or my property. Amber was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He's going to make our lives hell now. You know that, right? This isn't over for him. It's never over when someone gets the better of Trevor. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? I mean my husband. The words seemed to stick in her throat. Doesn't let things go. He holds grudges forever, and now you've humiliated him in front of his entire family, ruined his wedding day, cost him money, and screwed up our honeymoon. He's going to spend the next however long trying to make you pay for that. I felt my stomach drop. In all my planning, I'd focused on the immediate satisfaction of watching Trevor face consequences for his actions. I hadn't really thought about what came after. Maybe if you move the truck back to your own driveway from now on, I started. Amber shook her head. You don't understand. This isn't about parking anymore. This is personal now. This is war. She stood to leave, then paused at my door. I'm sorry this happened. I'm sorry Trevor never listened to you, and I'm sorry you felt like you had to do this. But mostly, I'm sorry for what's coming next. Amber's warning proved prophetic. The retaliation started Monday morning. I came home from my shift at the hospital to find my garbage cans overturned, trash scattered across my front yard and into the street. Not just tipped over, they'd been hurled with enough force to crack one of the lids. The mess was impressive and clearly intentional. I spent an hour cleaning up coffee grounds, food scraps, and torn paper that had blown halfway down the block. Mrs. Patterson watched from her window, occasionally shaking her head in what I hoped was sympathy rather than judgment. Tuesday brought a new escalation. Someone had used chalk to write Karen in huge letters across my driveway. The chalk was the expensive kind that doesn't wash off easily. I know because I spent my evening scrubbing it with a wire brush and degreaser. Wednesday, my garden hose had been cut in 3 places. Thursday, someone had dumped motor oil on my front steps. By Friday, I was documenting each incident with photographs and timestamps, building a case for harassment charges if needed. The oil on my steps was the final straw. Not only was it a mess and a safety hazard, but it was clearly expensive to clean up. I'd have to hire professionals to prevent permanent staining of the concrete. This had moved beyond petty vandalism into genuine property damage. I called the police. Officer Maria Santos arrived an hour later, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable. I walked her through the week's events, showing her my photos and explaining the history with Trevor. "Have you actually seen your neighbor committing any of these acts?" she asked, making notes in a small pad. "No, but who else would it be? This started immediately after I had his truck towed." "That's not evidence, ma'am. That's speculation." I felt my frustration building. "So he can just keep destroying my property and there's nothing you can do?" "I can file a report for vandalism and harassment. We can patrol the area more frequently. But without witnesses or video evidence..." She shrugged apologetically. After Officer Santos left, I sat on my front porch staring at the oil stains and feeling defeated. Trevor was systematically making my life miserable, and apparently he was smart enough to do it without getting caught. That's when I noticed Dale, the tow truck driver, walking up my driveway. "Afternoon, ma'am. Sorry to bother you, but I wanted to check on how things were going after Saturday." I gestured at the oil stains. "About like you'd expect." Dale nodded grimly. "Yeah, I've seen this before. Guy gets his truck towed, takes it personal, decides to make the property owner suffer. Usually gets ugly before it gets better." "Any suggestions?" "Get security cameras. Good ones, with night vision and motion detection. Document everything, and I mean everything, and..." He hesitated. "And?" "Maybe consider a restraining order. I've been in this business 15 years, and guys like your neighbor don't usually stop on their own. They escalate until someone makes them stop." After Dale left, I drove to the electronics store and spent $800 I didn't really have on a home security system. 4 cameras with night vision, motion detection, and smartphone alerts. I spent my entire Saturday installing them, learning how the app worked, and positioning them to cover every angle of my property. Sunday night at 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the camera app and watched, in perfect, high-definition clarity, as Trevor crept across my front yard, carrying a bag of what looked like fertilizer. He moved carefully, clearly trying to stay quiet, but my cameras caught everything: his face, his movements, even the logo on his t-shirt. I watched him spread the fertilizer across my lawn in a pattern I couldn't quite make out. Then he pulled something else from the bag, a large bottle that he began pouring over the fertilizer. The liquid caught the infrared light, creating strange patterns on my screen. It wasn't until he was walking back to his house that I realized what he'd done. The fertilizer pattern, combined with the liquid, probably bleach or some other chemical, would kill my grass in a very specific design. I saved the video file and waited for morning to see Trevor's artwork. When the sun came up, I walked outside to find "bitch" burned into my front lawn in letters 10 feet tall. But this time, I had him on camera. The video evidence changed everything. Officer Santos returned that afternoon with a very different attitude, and by Tuesday, Trevor was facing charges for vandalism, harassment, and destruction of property. The security footage was so clear that his lawyer advised him to take a plea deal rather than risk a trial. Trevor paid $20,500 in restitution for the damage to my lawn and property, plus court costs and community service. More importantly, the judge issued a restraining order prohibiting him from coming within 50 feet of my property. The parking problem solved itself permanently. Trevor now parks his truck in his own driveway, and when that's full, he uses the street like every other civilized human being. But the real resolution came 6 months later when Amber knocked on my door again, this time to tell me they were getting divorced. "The wedding day thing was just the beginning," she explained. "Watching him obsess over revenge, seeing how far he was willing to go just to punish you for standing up for yourself, it opened my eyes to who I'd married." She moved out the following month. Trevor sold the house and moved across town, and a lovely family with 2 young children bought his place. They park in their own driveway and wave when they see me. Sometimes I wonder if I should feel guilty about inadvertently ending a marriage. But then I remember Trevor spreading chemicals on my lawn at 3 a.m., and I think some marriages are meant to end. The whole experience taught me that being a good neighbor doesn't mean being a doormat. Sometimes the only way to get respect is to demand it, even if the timing isn't perfect. And sometimes the most effective way to solve a parking problem is to let natural consequences do the teaching. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, if you enjoyed this tale of neighborhood justice, subscribe for more real-life